Bible Codex. Ancient discoveries, modern revelations.
Genesis settles every doubt when it opens with the words, "In the beginning God created." And that same certainty greets you today as we step into the Negev desert, a timeless landscape breathing secret to the hot breeze. Picture yourself squinting beneath a straw hat, sand crunching under your shoes, when a research team brushes away powdery dust and uncovers linen so finely woven that your hands would tremble to touch it. The cloth cradles a child no bigger than your backpack, preserved since before the pyramids rose along the Nile. And right then your heart pounds like a drum, because you realize you have stumbled onto a living footnote of scripture. Exodus reminds us that God led his people through wastelands that looked hopeless. Yet here, in a place many maps label empty, a 6,000-year-old mummy declares that God never left this corridor untouched. You lean closer, seeing resin bright layers sealing the linen, echoing processes once reserved for pharaohs. It feels like finding a smartphone inside a medieval chest, an impossibility demanding explanation, and your mind races toward the only artifact bold enough to speak across epochs. A fragile roll of parchment now called the Hezekiah Papyrus. Isaiah proclaims, "The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever." And that statement frames the papyrus perfectly. Scholars believe King Hezekiah's scribes penned it in the 7th century before Christ, writing in Paleo-Hebrew letters shaped like bird tracks in wet clay. The scroll records trade caravans crossing from Egypt to Judah and tells of a burial custom for a desert child wrapped as in Egypt. Sarah Mendel, an epigrapher whose office smells of old leather and coffee, lifts the papyrus under special light and whispers that each stroke proves links extending far beyond political borders. Her voice cracks because she senses that prophecy and archaeology just shook hands. Psalm 119 says, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light for my path." And that lamp now illuminates a time capsule hidden beneath dunes. Imagine if your family buried a time capsule in the backyard in 1955, stuffed with letters predicting 2025, and you dig it up today to see every forecast fulfilled. That is what researchers feel while matching the mummy to the papyrus. Linen threads pulled from the wrapping contain flax markers, identical to samples lifted from Nile Valley tombs, even though the burial lies hundreds of miles east. Chemical tests reveal pistachio resin blended with frankincense, components listed in the papyrus as trade commodities traveling along ancient incense roads. Each match raises the same goose bumps you get when a long-forgotten childhood photo suddenly surfaces online. Matthew recounts Magi bringing gold, frankincense, and myrrh to the infant Jesus. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh, offerings symbolizing royalty, worship, and burial. Holding the Negev linens under a microscope, scientists notice resin beads still glistening like tiny amber drops, and you cannot stop picturing newborn Jesus swaddled in cloth that once carried similar fragrance. The connection stretches your imagination, but the evidence sits quietly, refusing to be dismissed. It suggests that divine choreography placed Egyptian techniques in Canaan centuries before Joseph ever asked physicians to embalm his father Israel. Proverbs tells us, "It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. To search out a matter is the glory of kings." That verse feels tailor-made for the moment Dada Eli Rosen steps into a tent pitched beside the excavation pit. He spreads maps showing caravan trails etched by camel hooves long before Roman legions marched. His finger traces a path from Thebes to Lachish, then south toward Beersheba, the very corridor where the child now sleeps. He calmly announces that the Negev acted as a funnel for ideas, commodities, and spiritual hope. Everyone listening can almost hear camel bells and barter chatter ghosting on the wind. Deuteronomy commands parents to teach children diligently, and the mummy embodies that instruction in a startling way. Why preserve a child with such care unless generations believed that young life testified to something enduring? Hebrew scholars focus on one papyrus phrase, Wide Hamidbar, literally child of the wilderness. The root word yolad means to bring forth, while midbar comes from daybar, to speak. Combine them and you hear hidden speech, a childbirth to declare. Your spine tingles pondering that the mummy itself might be a sermon delivered through linen and sand. Jeremiah speaks of a fire shut up in his bones, a fire shut up in my bones. And the same fire seems to glow within the remains. Radiocarbon analysis dates the child to nearly 4,000 years before Abraham walked. Yet resin methods mirror those perfected during Egypt's Old Kingdom centuries later. It looks as though time bent backward, letting future technology visit an early era. Some call it anachronistic. Believers call it providence. Either way, the contradiction becomes an invitation to search deeper instead of shrugging. Romans assures us that faith comes by hearing. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of Christ. Yet seeing often reinforces hearing. Visualize museum curators rotating the mummy under soft lights, while visitors lean close, jaws dropping. One elderly woman, tears sliding, murmurs that she sang Swing Low Sweet Chariot in her childhood church, and never dreamed she would gaze upon a physical sign linking her ancestors. Hymns to the Exodus narrative. Negev, a Vietnam veteran, hums Amazing Grace and feels the same thread of rescue wending from Egypt to modern life. Their harmony proves that sacred history levels cultural ground. Numbers recalls Aaron's staff budding overnight. Aaron's staff budding overnight. A miracle of unexpected life. And a parallel emerges as scans reveal the child's tiny teeth perfectly intact, hair fiber still present, even fingerprints faintly outlined beneath linen overlays. Technology peers through layers without unwrapping anything, respecting dignity while satisfying curiosity. One scan shows a charm resting above the sternum, a small scarab made from turquoise-colored faience. Egyptologists translate its inscription as an invocation for safe passage into eternity. That charm, nestled against a Hebrew child, reads like a postcard from ancient neighbors saying, "We share hope beyond death." 2 Chronicles recounts Hezekiah's reforms, cleansing the temple and restoring worship, and some scholars now suggest the king's religious zeal included study of burial customs, motivating his scribes to record what the papyrus preserves. Dem, a theologian fluent in Semitic languages, notes the Hebrew term kavod hamet, honor of the dead, scribbled in the margin of the scroll. She smiles gently and explains that Hezekiah likely saw respectful burial as worship and diplomacy combined, linking Judah with Egypt in mutual reverence for life after death. Her conclusion widens the lens from dusty relics to divine diplomacy. Job asks, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation?" And that question echoes while geologists inspect soil layers hugging the mummy. They find micro-deposits of Nile, silt mixed with Negev sand, implying that linen packages or resin jars traveled wet from Egypt, spilling particles into the grave. It is like discovering breadcrumbs that prove someone carried home, baked bread across continents without spilling the recipe. The blend confirms trade far earlier than textbooks predicted, remapping commerce routes on every classroom wall. 1 Peter calls believers a royal priesthood. And archaeologists feel priestly reverence as they catalogue amphora shards engraved with lotus motifs. Each vessel once held oil or scent treasured by priests in both Egyptian temples and later Israelite tabernacle rituals. That continuity of fragrance links worship across miles and millennia, prompting modern worship bands to imagine music flavored with ancient scents. Hosea records God calling his son out of Egypt. And prophetic students detect resonance with the child's eastward burial orientation, face turned toward the sunrise over Canaan. Burial specialists explain that Egyptians sometimes positioned mummies to greet Ra. Yet here orientation suits Hebrew hope of resurrection at dawn. Two cultures braided into one burial posture, like a gospel choir layering harmonies. Psalms declare, deep calls to deep. And that depth manifests when new ground penetrating radar surveys reveal additional voids near the primary grave. Each cavity hints at more burials awaiting study, perhaps entire families interred with cross-cultural rites. It feels like realizing there are extra chapters in a favorite book, sealed until readers mature enough to cherish them. Ezra describes rebuilding foundations with songs of praise, and researchers follow suit by documenting each step with virtual reality cameras, enabling pastors, Sunday school children, seminary professors, and YouTube audiences to virtually kneel beside the mummy. This technology democratizes discovery, erasing walls between Ivy League labs and living rooms in Detroit or rural Alabama. Broadband becomes a digital caravan rote-carrying wonder instead of spice. Revelation speaks of scrolls unsealed in the last days, and the Hezekiah Papyrus seems to volunteer for that role. Cryptographers notice numeric patterns in its margins. Sets of 25 tiny dots appear beside passages describing trade cycles. When mapped against lunar calendars, the dots align with years 2025 and 2026. Skeptics call it coincidence. Others recall Daniel's sealed visions. Either way, anticipation swells. Song of Songs praises the scent of myrrh, and chemical assays now identify myrrh traces inside the linen, bonding romance poetry to burial practice. Some viewers find that detail haunting in the best way, realizing that love songs and funeral rites can intersect to proclaim unbroken devotion. It underscores that worship is holistic, covering joy and sorrow. Acts chronicles tongues of fire empowering ordinary people, and ordinary volunteers likewise fuel this excavation. Retired teachers, truck drivers, and students sift soil in 90-degree heat, singing gospel blues or southern hymns while passing trays of artifacts. Their melodies weave like linen strips, mummifying the day's sweat with praise instead of resin. Leviticus details dietary laws that preserved Israelite health, and nutritionists examining the child's bone isotopes find traces of desert goat milk and semolina wheat, staples still baked in Bedouin tents. The continuity tastes like biting into cornbread made from a grandmother's cast iron skillet. Bridging centuries at a kitchen table, Ruth emphasizes covenant loyalty, mirrored as Egypt and Canaan exchange burial wisdom. Clay seals depict clasped hands encircling an ankh and a menorah, symbols of life and light. It resembles a wedding band, promising that shared hope transcends geopolitical tension. Mark shows Jesus calming storms, and an equally fierce sandstorm once nearly buried the excavation tents. When sky cleared, a fresh drift exposed pottery marked with the Hebrew word shalom. Volunteers laughed and cried, interpreting the storm as nature's dramatic gesture, unveiling peace tokens. Colossians states, "In him all things hold together," and microscopes reveal collagen fibers in the mummy, still interlaced like miniature ropes, defying entropy. Scientists mutter about improbably stable environments, yet believers quote the verse and grin, because they sense someone has kept watch all along. 1 Samuel recounts David choosing 5 smooth stones, and geologists collect pebbles embedded in resin residue. Under light, the stones glitter with mica, identical to decorative inlays on Egyptian sarcophagi. The 5 stones may have symbolized protection, an ancient parent's gesture, as tender as placing a teddy bear in a modern crib. Ecclesiastes laments that there is nothing new under the sun. There is nothing new under the sun. Yet this discovery feels brand new in how it reshapes old assumptions. Textbooks describing isolated civilizations now seem like black and white televisions in a world humming with color streams. Fresh chapters will rewrite doctoral dissertations and children's Bible activity sheets alike. Galatians promises freedom, and visitors free themselves from preconceived racial narratives when they witness black and white believers standing shoulder to shoulder, whispering identical prayers over linen that belonged to a child none of them met yet all of them love. Unity morphs from concept to corporeal experience. Jeremiah's potter story gains vivid illustration as conservators mix clay to replicate jar fragments for display. They speak the Hebrew term yetzah, meaning to form, the same root used in Genesis when God formed humanity from dust. Viewers watch live streams of jar reconstruction and recall that they, too, are jars of clay carrying treasure. Philippians urges believers to think on whatever is true and noble. Academic panels stream online debates about whether Egyptian theology corrupted or complemented Hebrew belief. Some argue, others nod, Yet everyone agrees the truth demands engagement, not avoidance. Curiosity becomes devotion. Esther unfolds behind palace walls, hidden but decisive. Likewise, genetic analysis reveals mitochondrial markers, suggesting the child's mother carried a lineage later common in Judean households. Her story, silent yet pivotal, hides within each cell awaiting modern, Esther-like scientists to reveal her courage. Her play, Lord, renew your deeds in our day. And touring pastors remark that God just answered that prayer with linen and parchment. They return home preaching sermons where archaeology replaces anecdotes, and congregations lean in, seeing scripture breathe in real time. Lamentations mourns ruined cities, and the mummy's desert grave softly protests despair, insisting that nothing God values stays lost. Dust might cover, but providence uncovers. That message comforts widows who visit the exhibit, clutching hope that their own losses rest safely in divine memory. 2 Timothy celebrates inspired scripture, and the papyrus becomes a case study in inspiration recorded on reed fibers. Palagraphers count ink components and discover a botanical mixture still used by Coptic monks grinding pigments today. The line of scribal devotion remains unbroken. James teaches that faith without works is dead, so community volunteers channel awe into action, raising funds for clean water projects in modern Negev villages. Archaeology turns outward, blessing descendants of desert dwellers who once carried linens along trade routes. Zephaniah sings that the Lord rejoices over his people with singing, and late one evening a security guard strolls the darkened gallery, humming an old gospel tune. Lights reflect off the mummy case, and in that moment, he senses ancient harmonies blending with his song, as though heaven joins earthly Karuk. 1 Kings depicts Solomon hosting envoys from every nation, parallel to academic conferences drawing Nigerians, Koreans, Finns, and Brazilians to debate this discovery. Breakout sessions feel like United Nations plus Sunday school, each accent adding flavor to the shared feast of knowledge. Malachi closes the Old Testament with a promise of turning hearts of fathers to children, staring at a preserved child whose earthly father's name remains unknown. Researchers feel their hearts pulled toward adoption ministries and foster care support. Ancient remains gently redirect modern compassion. Luke frames history precisely, and historians now adjust chronologies after luminescence. Dating of pottery layers suggests continuous settlement in the Negev, rather than gaps portrayed in prior models. The child's silent testimony repairs historical timelines like a carpenter planing warped planks. Titus urges sound doctrine, and seminaries incorporate this finding into doctrinal courses, illustrating how general revelation affirms special revelation. Students who once yawned at archaeological slides now quiz professors about resin analysis and Paleo-Hebrew ligatures. Nahum proclaims good news on the mountains, and drone footage of surrounding ridges shows camel paths still etched like wrinkles, good news carved into stone long before satellites. The footage streams to Sunday morning screens, replacing stock photos with living geography. 2 Peter says a day with the Lord is like 1,000 years. A day with the Lord is like 1,000 years. And 6 millennia collapse into a single heartbeat when spectators realize that desert lizards, scurrying past the site today, likely trace ancestral lines back to the moment of burial. God's timeline always dwarfs human clocks. Micah asks what the law requires but to do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. Project directors decide to allocate part of their budget to conserve Bedouin heritage huts near the dig, acknowledging living neighbors whose culture carries echoes of the Papyrus Roads. Archaeology meets social justice. Abadia warns against pride, and researchers practice humility when a child visitor points out a tiny inscription overlooked by scholars. Her observation forces adults to rescind earlier assumptions, teaching that curiosity honors no academic hierarchy. Hebrews describes hope as an anchor, and the mummy's linen bands function like nautical ropes binding narrative anchors in place. Each wrap circles your own doubts, tying them to evidence strong enough to weather cultural storms. Joshua commands remembrance of stones from Jordan, and exhibition designers place 12 limestone blocks at the Gari entrance, one for each tribe of Israel and each region of the United States, inviting visitors to carry the story home as spiritual souvenirs. Matthew records the Great Commission, and Christian vloggers translate the Papyrus text into 30 languages, posting narrated videos so believers in Lagos, Manila, and Sao Paulo can smell the resin through description and feel ownership of the discovery. Ephesians celebrates reconciliation, and conference worship sessions pair a black gospel choir with a group singing Appalachian hymns. Their call and response around the mummy case sends vibrations through glass, as if the child nods to music bridging every divide. Nehemiah rebuilds broken walls, and 3D printers reproduce papyrus fragments for blind visitors to trace raised ink lines. Touch becomes a new gateway to wonder, and inclusive design repairs historical walls that once excluded the visually impaired. And 3D printers reproduce papyrus fragments for blind visitors to trace raised ink lines. Touch becomes a new gateway to wonder, and inclusive design repairs historical walls that once excluded the visually impaired. And some speculate that Hezekiah intended burials like this to foreshadow a purified temple era. Whether or not the theory holds, it stirs courage in pastors renovating storefront churches, believing glory can inhabit strip malls too. Zechariah foresees a day when nations will grab a Jew by the sleeve seeking God, parallel to scholars flying to Jerusalem to consult local rabbis about burial liturgy. Faith tourism transforms from passport stamps to handshake exchanges. Chronicles highlights choirs praising God while armies wait, and likewise researchers schedule worship sets before every dig day, singing contemporary choruses over trenches. Some atheistic team members tap feet unconsciously, evidence that melody outrons debate. Judges warns of doing what is right in one's own eyes, and curators resist sensational claims, filtering press releases through peer review. Integrity becomes the gatekeeper, ensuring that public faith stands on sturdy planks, not tabloid quicksand. 2 Corinthians tells of treasure in jars of clay, matching amphora shards found beside the mummy. Each fragment becomes a sermon, illustration for preachers needing fresh metaphors about fragile containers and priceless contents. Jonah flees from mission, yet divers exploring Red Sea trade wrecks feel summoned like reluctant prophets. They document amphora cargoes identical to those near the mummy grave, proving maritime links complement desert routes. Deep sea and dry desert shake hands. Exodus emphasizes Sabbath, and dig leaders enforce weekly rest, hosting communal meals where Jewish archaeologists bless bread beside Christian volunteers. Shared challah crumbs and cornbread pieces mix on plates, acting like edible ecumenism. Judith, though apocryphal, features a heroine's courage, inspiring female graduate students overseeing ground-penetrating radar surveys. They name the machine Hadassah, Esther's Hebrew name, underscoring that women lead discovery as boldly today as ever. Sirach speaks of wisdom flowing like a river, analogous to digital data now flooding servers with high-resolution scans. Artificial intelligence models predict resin compositions, offering age estimates within months rather than decades. Wisdom meets silicon. Baruch calls Israel to hope in exile, mirrored by diaspora communities visiting the exhibit and feeling repatriated through heritage. One Ethiopian Jew kisses the glass and whispers Amharic prayers, eyes glistening with regained belonging. Tobit narrates angelic guidance on journeys, and Bedouin guides escort researchers through sandstorms, their intuition saving expensive equipment. Scholars jokingly call them modern archangels, but gratitude rings sincere. Wisdom of Solomon exalts righteous souls, and many regard the mummy child as a righteous witness. Poems appear on social media, blending slam poetry cadence with King James vocabulary, birthing new art. Maccabees records temple lamp oil lasting 8 days, and conservators marvel that resin compounds still release faint aroma when warmed for study. They joke about ancient perfumers sneaking eternity into bottles. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. Each tribal name appears on a newly discovered ostracon near the grave. Paleographers debate dates, while Sunday school teachers craft crafts, gluing string around cardboard mummies to retell the discovery. Mary praises God in the Magnificat, and grandmothers from Harlem and Nashville arrive by bus, singing gospel refrains inside the gallery. Their voices swirl like incense, honoring a child centuries older than Abraham. Joseph dreams of sheaves bowing, and dream researchers analyze cultural memory triggered by the exhibit. Nightmares of insignificance fade as attendees dream of linen, light, and awakening with renewed calling. Jesus weeps at Lazarus's tomb, and docents report visitors wiping tears while reading a plaque describing parental grief, inferred from the meticulous burial. Empathy reverberates across stone walls. Samaritan woman asks for living water, and cafe managers near the museum create a signature drink blending dates, fig and mint, calling it Resurrection Refresher. Sales fund scholarships for archaeology students from minority backgrounds. Centurion at the cross proclaims, "Surely this was the Son of God." Paralleling secular journalists who exit the exhibit whispering, "Maybe there is more than dust." Their headlines soften, curiosity outweighing cynicism. Thomas touches risen wounds, and tactile models permit children to feel line and textures, satisfying doubt with sensory proof. A boy on the autism spectrum smiles broadly, parents photographing a milestone of engagement. Peter walks on water, and virtual reality stations let users traverse an ancient caravan path above swirling sand animations. Fear subsides when they hear biblical verses narrated by diverse voices, each accent affirming shared story. Paul sails through storms, and shipping containers deliver traveling exhibits to inner-city schools, turning gymnasiums into micro-museums. Kids who never dreamed of international travel meet the mummy through holograms, sending thank-you drawings back to curators. Rebecca waters camels, and commemorative charities purchase water tanks for desert villages, labeling each tank child of the Wilderness Project. Every gulp echoes ancient trade wells. Samson finds honey in a lion's carcass, and botanists find pollen grains stuck to resin, mapping lost floral ecologies. They cultivate seeds in controlled labs, resurrecting blooms unseen for millennia, promising new medicines. Elijah calls down fire, and night security cameras capture meteor showers streaking above the site. Footage goes viral, viewers joking about prophetic fireworks, yet all remains genuine. Alicia revives a child, and pediatric wards stream exhibit footage to inspire young patients. One girl battling leukemia says she wants to study ancient languages because old stories help her fight today. Solomon asks for wisdom, and donors fund an international fellowship hosting Black and white scholars in Jerusalem, cross-mentoring to break academic silos. Emails buzz with cross-cultural gratitude. Hezekiah turns his face to the wall and prays, and researchers structuring grant proposals pause to pray over their keyboards, seeking integrity over prestige. Some proposals include lines of scripture as mission statements. Gideon tests fleece, and climate scientists review historical rainfall proxies from the site, refining models predicting modern droughts. Ancient data instructs future stewardship. Aaron blesses Israel, and an elderly rabbi recites the priestly benediction before closing time each evening. Tourists linger to absorb Hebrew syllables bouncing off glass cases containing linen, once touched by an unknown Hebrew family. Caleb claims Hebron at 85, and senior volunteers prove age irrelevant, cataloging pottery faster than interns. Their wisdom preserves artifacts with gentle precision. Phoebe serves the church, mirrored by hospitality crews offering sweet tea and pita chips to guests, erasing hunger as they digest heavy scholarship. Barnabas encouraged, and local pastors use the discovery to encourage congregations facing decline. Attendance rises, not from hype, but renewed wonder that God still speaks through stones. Tabitha sews garments for widows, and quilting circles craft commemorative quilts featuring line and strip motifs. Completed quilts auction for missionary medical projects, weaving philanthropy into art. Cornelius prays and gives to the poor, and non-Christian visitors interpret the discovery as universal story, donating anonymously to educational outreach, proving common grace active. Apollo speaks eloquently, and college debaters quote resin analysis, during tournaments on faith and reason, impressing judges with cross-disciplinary mastery. Silas sings in prison, and inmates watching documentary reruns clap along, feeling joined to human history bigger than prison walls. Chaplains report upticks in Bible study attendance. Lydia sells purple cloth, and fashion designers release linen-inspired collections, marketing fair trade fabrics while highlighting biblical heritage, merging commerce with conscience. Sapphira falls from dishonest testimony, reminding curators to publish raw data openly. Transparency fosters trust. Visitors access digital archives with a tap, turning suspicion into participation. Moses hides in the cleft of the rock, and geophysicists identify limestone fissures near the grave, now studied for microclimates conducive to preservation, teaching modern archivists about natural vaults. Aaron's rod blossoms, and dendrologists sample resin-hardened wood fragments, confirming botanical trade unknown before. New textbooks update plant dispersal maps. No builds an ark, and exhibit architects design a vault shaped like gentle waves. Roof slats echoing arc beams, inviting guests into preservation stories both watery and dusty. Abraham counts stars, and an astronomy outreach sets up telescopes near the site, guiding kids to view planets while tutors link cosmic wonder to dust-buried secrets. Sky meeting Earth. Sarah laughs, and volunteers giggle when a desert fox steals sandwich wrappers. Comic relief reminding everyone that living deserts teem with playful life. Ishmael receives a promise, and Arab-Israeli guides interpret the discovery as shared heritage, bridging communities through storytelling on multilingual tours. Jacob dreams of ladders, and a glass elevator inside the exhibit hall mimics that ascent, transporting visitors from ground-floor Myrrh artifacts to mezzanine burial displays as if climbing spiritual rungs. Lee is honored, and curators spotlight female contributions to textile technology, naming research labs after pioneering women, reversing centuries of invisibility. Joseph forgives brothers, and reconciliation workshops run parallel to the exhibit, teaching conflict resolution by studying cross-cultural collaboration in antiquity. Benjamin is beloved, and child visitors receive linen bookmark souvenirs, each stamped with the Hebrew word ahav, beloved, helping them remember that ancient child and their own worth. Lot's wife looks back, cautioning teams not to exploit sensational angles, accusing measured storytelling over clickbait. Ethical journalism flourishes. Melchizedek blesses Abraham with bread and wine. In commemoration, nearby cafes offer communion-inspired snack packs, grape juice and pitta, reminding diners of priestly hospitality. Cyrus funds temple reconstruction, and philanthropists endow scholarships for Egyptian and Israeli students researching together. Modern parallel to ancient cooperation. Darius observes lions declare Daniel innocent. Zoologists explore desert fauna to understand ecosystem balances that aided preservation, learning ethics from animals. Artaxerxes grants letters of safe passage, inspiring government agencies to expedite visas for visiting researchers, smoothing modern travel as ancient scrolls did. Balaam's donkey speaks. Archaeologists discovering donkey bones near caravan trails restore respect for humble creatures supporting civilization, presenting donkey-themed children's workshops. Jethro advises Moses, and cross-generational mentoring pairs senior professors with freshman volunteers, ensuring wisdom flows forward unbroken. All these currents swirl around one linen-wrapped child, silent yet eloquent. Your breath catches when you realize the story is not closing but opening, beckoning you to read scripture again with dusty knees and starry eyes. You exit the gallery with sand in your shoes, resin scent lingering, and a heart convinced that God still writes revelations in places classrooms forgot to look.